TrainTopia is just an incredible odyssey into not only trains, but the landscape and everything that trains meant to our land and our people in miniature. It's kind of a tour of the American Southwest. The layout was a gift of Steve Sanders, who passed away unfortunately at a fairly early age, and his wife donated the entire train layout to the museum about 4 years ago. And the more you look at it, the more amazed you'll be, because it's just a whole world in miniature.
Steve loved trains because as a young boy, he had asked for a train set for Christmas, and he got one, but his dad ended up playing with it most of the time, so Steve didn't get to play with it. Then he was shipped off to military school, and he was gone away from home for many years, and he never got to have trains again until he decided to start building this one. He started collecting the train cars and engines and sets, and he got them through a hobby shop.
My husband and I owned a toy train store, and we helped build the first part of Steve's layout. He was a wonderful customer of ours.
And he would come home and he would have these red boxes, and they were just kept stacking up, and finally I said, "Steve, what are you going to do with these trains?" He said, "I think I have an idea." Before I knew it, like the next week, he had it started. He had plans made and where it was started to build. I mean, he collected the trains though over probably a good 10 years or more. We had a big, huge room above our kitchen at our house. We had it built just to put the trains there. And so they would build these sections at a time and then bring them and put them in. Now this was upstairs, and you couldn't go up the stairs and you couldn't go up the elevator. So we had an outside door to a balcony that was built just for that specific purpose. And they would bring them and have a front loader and bring them up and then put them into the room, and then they were all put together at the end. So it was many, many sections. What's the saying, you go big or you go home? He loved all that type of thing. He was very detail oriented.
On a small level, you can get down and look at the people who are in these little towns and villages along the way, and it's just amazing because they're all doing something that they would have done in real life, but these are little people in miniature, and the more you look, the more you're going to see. It's just absolutely fascinating.
Steve was 68 when he passed away. He got diagnosed with cancer, and then he died in May, so it'll be 10 years this coming month. He served 2 different tours of duty in Vietnam. He was a Green Beret, and he was exposed to Agent Orange. After Steve passed away, I realized that I wanted to have a smaller home. That house was huge. And I knew I couldn't sell the house with the trains in it. I had heard about the train museum in Frisco, and so I went out there one day and I asked to speak to the director, and it was Bob Laprelle. I said, "I really would like for you to come and see this train layout. You're not going to believe it." And he did. He came right over in the next couple of days, and he loved it. And so I said, "I want to donate this." And he said, "That would be wonderful."
He said, "We've been donated a wonderful big layout." And I said, "Whose layout was this?" And he said, "The Steve Sanders family." I said, "Pat, my husband and I, we built that through our store." And he didn't believe me. I went home, found some old paperwork and invoices and our project file, and I brought it to him a week later, and I said, "Here, you can have this now, you need it."
Then they had to get the funding to have it done, and they got the funding, and then we had to get it moved.
When we disassembled the layout, we had to break it down into about 30 different pieces. I mean, in some places we had to come in there and you make saw cuts, and it killed us to have to do it, but it was the only way we were going to get it out of the Sanders home and up here to Frisco. So there were some very invasive tactics, as far as moving that layout. The great thing is we were able to reconstruct it and actually enhance it in a lot of ways. We completely rewired the layout. One of our volunteers literally wrote the software for the operations on this layout, and several other wonderful volunteers were able to bring it up to fully automated status now. So the trains stop and start on their own. And it's just amazing how it takes care of itself.
His biggest wish was that a lot of people would be able to see the trains. And now, see, that wish has come true.
Now we see tens of thousands of people a year who come and are just fascinated with it. You know, in a way, Steve Sanders, his vision and his love for all of that lives on, you know, through so many different people now who can enjoy it.
Welcome to TrainTopia at the Museum of the American Railroad. My name is Kelly Murphy. I'm Chief Operating Officer here at the museum. And today we're going to show you a little bit about the layout, and hopefully you'll come out and visit us. So here in TrainTopia, all of the trains are automated, and we have an entire team that works on the layout. They take care of the maintenance. They've installed all of the components to the automation so that they move more like an actual railroad, more like a real railroad would. This team is made up of our volunteers, Steve Foss, Rick Reinecker, and Dick Thompson. And they're very dedicated to keeping these trains running, performing the maintenance, and of course the staff helps out as well. So TrainTopia, it's high-tech. It's also G-scale model trains, which are the larger trains, so it makes it easier for the little kids to see and enjoy. TrainTopia was actually donated by the Sanders family, and it was made possible by Amanda and Brent Ryan, and the space we're in right now inside the Frisco Discovery Center was provided by the City Frisco Community Development Corporation. So a lot of folks had to come together to make this layout a reality and to make it available for the public to enjoy. So here we are in Colorado. The layout covers a lot of terrain, a lot of the US. This is a logging camp. It's a really good teaching tool for the students because we can show them how things go from field to factory, how raw materials end up making things like homes and structures. And we have a scavenger hunt for all of our students and also our visitors. So you can find quirky little things that are hidden on the layout, fun things that you can do with your family. So coming along here, we'll transition into New Mexico. And of course we have little towns that are hidden. This is a little town in the valley here. And we have lots of people, lots of characters to see. That's the fun thing about TrainTopia is not only do you get to be a kid again, there's so much to see. Visiting once isn't enough. You have to keep coming back and seeing more and more. So Steve Sanders had this layout created. It was a partnership between Sherry and Pat Neal and a gentleman named Rob Reed to bring this layout from Steve's imagination off paper and actually to make it a reality. And this kind of documents Steve's travels as a Boy Scout, going to camps in the summer. These are all of his favorite places. In the 1960s, here we have New Mexico. We have lots of little structures, curio shops, and all of the fun essentially of his childhood we have here represented in the layout, which makes it fun because you get to be a kid again when you come to TrainTopia. Everything's in miniature, but there are lots of things we can point back to actual trains that you will see in Frisco. There's a BNSF train running by right now, and the BNSF line is actually the original Frisco line that helped establish this city, and it still runs past our museum several times a day. Over here we have a locomotive roundhouse, and we can kind of show the students how you turn trains. You can't turn them like an automobile. You have to have a roundhouse to spin the locomotives around so that you can get them going in the direction they need to go. As you see here, we have lots of miniature workers that are working on constructing part of the roundhouse. So visitors get to see all the exciting activity going on the layout, not just the moving trains, but all of the details as well. Over here we have the Sanders boat. We have Jane sitting here on the back, and just a representation of some of the fun things from their life together, because we're very grateful that Mrs. Sanders and her daughters decided to donate the layout to the museum so that the public could enjoy it as well. The Brazos power plant. This is where we have the opportunity to teach students about how the economy works, how trains play a vital role in the health of the U.S. economy, in the Texas economy in particular. And we have the oil fields over here. We talk about the Texas oil boom, and they get to see that close up, the actual operating oil fields there. And of course the little oil boom towns, all of the towns that would spring up along the way. It all goes back to economics and development of technology, and the railroads have always been at the cutting edge of that technology. So it's nice to represent that in steam locomotives and in diesel locomotives, and in the future electric. Over here we have a little oil boom town, lots of activity going on, vehicles and people. And just to go back to the detail of the layout, all of these little trees that you see, those were all handmade. Lots of artisans came together to make this layout as realistic as possible. So here we are at the Palo Duro Canyon. Lots of great topography represented here in the TrainTopia layout, and the Palo Duro Canyon wouldn't be complete without the drive-in movie theater. So here we have an actual drive-in movie theater that operates, comes complete with movie posters and authentic speakers, and it was a fun way to spend time with your family on the weekends. There's a playground, concession stand, of course, some picnic tables, where all the folks here in their cars can enjoy a film.
Show starts in 4 minutes. Visit our snack bar and treat yourself to some delicious Castleberry's pit-cooked barbecue sandwiches. Also at the snack bar, you'll find popcorn and soft drinks and candy and French fries to go with your Castleberry's barbecue sandwiches. There's plenty of time before the movie starts, so visit our snack bar right now.
Over here we have the Sanders Ranch, and we have the horses, and this is just another representation of Steve Sanders' life. A very important part of their life was their ranch and their farm, and lots of memories scattered throughout the layout of the Sanders family, which are wonderful. We like to share those with folks when they visit, and we like to tell the students when they come out to visit us that all of this was intentional. The entire design, we use it to teach geography, technology, all the wonderful things that the students really enjoy when they come out to visit. We have scavenger hunts so that the students will really focus on the detail and really pay attention to what they're seeing. And it takes more than one visit to see all of the wonderful details in the layout, all the way down to little pigeons that are on some of the buildings. This is downtown Dallas in the 1960s. This is kind of a time capsule here. You have lots of buildings, lots of activities, automobiles, people walking along the streets. We have a bit of a traffic issue. We have our police cars stopping traffic. All of the little traffic signals work. For the folks that are car enthusiasts, we have a scavenger hunt for you guys, so you can look for all these wonderful vehicles on the layout. We have a little Texaco garage. It's a full-service station. You can see that they're pumping the fuel, they're cleaning the windshield. Everybody's having a good time. They're working on the cars. And then we spin around to Dallas Union Station, which is where you would still get on trains. We have some folks hailing taxi cabs, others that are going in to meet their train. All the hustle and bustle of 1960s Dallas is right there. In this corner we have the Hotel Settles, which pays homage to our wonderful donors that funded the establishment of the layout here in the Frisco Discovery Center, Amanda and Brent Ryan. And there's so much detail in this hotel. All the lights come on at different times. We see a few faces in the windows. It's a great representation of the actual hotel, so much detail there. And of course, we have some wonderful vintage cars that are parked in front of the hotel, coming and going. Since the trains are on an automated system, as you stand in one spot, you'll see several different trains pass by. Sometimes a steam locomotive, sometimes a diesel locomotive, sometimes a passenger train, and sometimes a freight train. So there's so much to see here. We really think of TrainTopia as a tourism destination within the Museum of the American Railroad, because you can see the model trains here, and then outside you can see the actual big trains.
We are in a 1937 vintage railroad dining car. And this is one of the superlatives in the collection here at the Museum of the American Railroad, because this is the finery of train travel. And for some people, it was the highlight of their experience of riding on a train, was to come into a dining car and have a meal just like in a restaurant, but this one's traveling 70 and 80 miles per hour. To tour this dining car is really an immersive experience, because you're enveloped in the original artifact. And this is where people actually ate. This is not a recreation. When you're seated in this car, you're actually experiencing what they experienced as early as 1937 when this car was built. So it's a very immersive experience for visitors. Well, the dining car is just one of 65 pieces in our collection. We call it rolling stock. That's all the cars and locomotives out here at the museum. It is one of the finer examples of what we have to offer in train travel in the 1930s, 1940s. But we also have the original Pullman sleeping cars. These were first-class cars with the private rooms and the berths that fold down during the evening hours. And they can walk through these cars and really get the experience of what it was like to travel on a first-class train. When you entered the dining car on a train, back in the 1930s, 1940s, you were greeted by a steward. And the steward was kind of the maitre d', of the dining car. And he had a certain demeanor about him. He was very professional. He had very high expectations for the experience of his passengers when they walked in here. And he also had an expectation of how you were to behave when you walked in the dining car. Back in those days, you got dressed up. Particularly first-class passengers, the men would wear, a coat, maybe a coat and tie. The women would wear dresses. And he would seat you in a dining car according to how he wanted everybody to be seated in these cars. He seated all the passengers together, number one. It was called community seating. He's only got 36 seats in here, so he has to be very efficient if he's going to serve 200 people, over the course of just a couple of hours. So when you walked in here, if you had a traveling companion, the two of you might be sitting in these two seats, and you're at the same table right across from other people on the train that you'd never met before. And that was very customary back in those days. People just expected it. But it was a great experience because you got to know other people on the train, you'd have conversations with them. The food was outstanding. These dining cars rivaled fine hotels. And the food and the service in a lot of places was unrivaled anywhere. And the railroads competed vigorously for your business with their dining cars. This dining car operated on a train that ran between San Antonio, Dallas, and St. Louis. And there were 3 or 4 other railroads that you could choose to go to St. Louis, a little bit different routes. But most people in North Texas chose the Missouri-Kansas-Texas Railroad, nicknamed the Katy. They chose that line to go to St. Louis because the dining car food was so good. It was kind of a loss leader for the railroads. They were famous for Southwestern cuisine. In fact, the Katy Railroad was known for their cornets, and these were little appetizers that were served for dinner, and they were little deep-fried pieces of cornbread that were seasoned. They were really good. In fact, they sold the mix on the train as a souvenir. In addition to the steward, you usually had 3 waiters that served in the dining section of these cars. This car has 36 seats, some of them had 48. And these were also professional waiters. These gentlemen had worked for the railroad in their dining car departments sometimes 30 and 40 years. It was a very respectable job. Traditionally, it was African American. And they got really good tips, and a lot of them put their kids and grandkids through college working in dining car service. And you had a lot of the finery in here. You had linen tablecloths and napkins. You had all of the china and glassware and silver service sets. There was no paper or plastic in here. This really was like a fine restaurant. You always had fresh flowers on the table. And the menus rotated throughout the year. They featured seasonal items, and they also featured items that kind of representative of the area where the train had operated. If you took the Southern Pacific line from New Orleans out to Los Angeles, you could get shrimp Creole in the dining car. And probably the most interesting item available was on the Santa Fe line between Chicago and Los Angeles. They had fresh Rocky Mountain trout offered on the menu in the dining car. They had a live fish tank back in the kitchen. If you ordered trout, they took a live fish and pan-fried it, and the steward filleted it right at your table. So that's some seriously fresh fish. And generally, if you didn't see something on the menu that you liked, they probably had something back there that they could cook that you would like. And there's a very extensive pantry back in those kitchens. This is the other 1/3 of the dining car that most people don't see. This is the kitchen. And it is a very efficient kitchen. There is not 1 square inch of wasted space in here, either overhead or in the way of countertops or even underneath the car for water storage. So we'll kind of do a quick walkthrough here and kind of show you what the kitchens are all about. First of all, this is your service door. This is where all of your food will come into the kitchen. The dining cars are provisioned or loaded at the origination of a train line, and then sometimes they actually have food that's put on the train en route if they're running out of various things, and of course they resupply it at the terminal so it can be turned and go back the other direction. This is where the crew can wash their hands. Always cleanliness here, so those small little efficient sinks so the crew could have clean hands. And as you move through the kitchen, you'll just see that everything has its place in here. The stove, that's probably the most interesting thing about this dining car. This is the original wood-burning stove from 1937 when this car was constructed. And believe it or not, the railroads invented Presto logs. And those are like compressed wood. They were put in these stoves, and the food, the flavor of the food was wonderful because it was all cooked on a wood-burning stove. And this is all original. We had a caterer in here the other day for an event that looked at this, and he just went nuts because it's all original. He says, "I want to cook on that stove." I said, "Come on back and do it." We actually have a grill, and you can see they could actually grill steaks. This is your coal and wood chute right here where you kept all of your fuel for the stove. Back here are your ice boxes. They used actual blocks of ice in this car. There was no refrigeration. They used ice along the lines because the railroads also shipped a lot of the perishables on their freight trains using ice cars. Again, more food storage up here. There's a pie safe. You can see the screen door right here. This is where all your pies and pastries were kept fresh in the car to serve up. And all the dishes were washed by hand. You know, there's no dishwasher. I mean, the cooks were the dishwashers, so you washed all your dishes down in these sinks. You had steam tables. Again, all of this was either heated with steam from the train, from the locomotive itself, because all the steam was actually piped through the train for heating, and they would also use them for the steam tables. And they could slice all their vegetables and meats here. And then the pantry area, you had 4 people that worked in here. You had a chef, 2 assistant cooks, and a pantry man. And he worked in the little pantry area, which was closest to the dining section. And he took all the plated up food, gave it off to the waiters, and then also brought all the dirty dishes back into the kitchen to be washed and reused. So this is what it would have been like if you'd worked in the kitchen of one of these dining cars. It was hot in here because you had the stove. There was usually no air conditioning in the early dining cars like this one. You would open the windows and a screen would come down in place of the glass, and that's the only ventilation that you got. I remember as a kid riding on the Santa Fe line, and in between meal times, the diner was closed. I popped my head into the pantry of the kitchen and I talked to the cooks, and they said, "You want something to eat?" And they grabbed something they were cooking and gave it to me and served me up right there. So to announce that the dining car was open and serving, one of the waiters would walk through every car on the train and ring these chimes. And back in those days, everybody knew what that meant, that the dining car was now open and serving. We're all things trains here in Frisco. And in fact, Frisco actually was started by the railroad. It was a water stop on the St. Louis-San Francisco Railroad. And being an enterprising company that the Frisco Railroad was, they bought the land around their water stop and platted a town. And that's really how it all started here back in 1902, just to replenish the trains with water so they could have enough steam to get to the next community. So we've kind of built on that theme here at the museum. Now we're national in scope. We have trains from all over North America in our collection, but we use Frisco as the local example of how the railroad started a community and was such a positive effect on it and caused it to grow. You know, Frisco today is, you know, somewhere around 200,000 people. So, I mean, it's a great story of how the railroad, you know, started a community. We have several wonderful pieces in our collection. We have the original depot from Dallas that was moved up here when we moved the entire collection, built in 1900. It's probably the oldest structure, you know, in Frisco now because it predates the city. We have a interlocking control tower. This is a tall building that controlled the movement of trains at a busy intersection that was back in Dallas. It's on display here in Frisco. It's called Tower 19. And we have, you know, 65 other cars and locomotives in our collection. The first class sleeping cars built by Pullman and operated by Pullman. We have the more austere coach cars, you know, for just basic train travel. We have a freight train here. We have the world's largest steam locomotive called the Big Boy that ran on the Union Pacific Transcontinental Line out west. We have the largest diesel electric locomotive. Among the other superlatives we have is a GG1 electric locomotive that ran between New York and Washington on their high-speed passenger line, built in 1940. And it actually pulled Robert Kennedy's funeral train in 1968. That particular locomotive has quite a history to it.
You might actually see a train while we're out here. They run pretty often.
We have guided tours and we get to actually take people through the museum site and talk about each piece in the collection. I like being in a business where we're here to enlighten and entertain and educate. And if our visitors leave here with one of those three or all of those three things, you know, we've accomplished our mission here.